definitely want them to be able to be participants in this conversation. So hello, everybody, and thank you for joining us. We're really happy that you're here tonight. I'm gonna just for a minute, we're spotlighting the people who are sort of behind the scenes and participating. I'm Dr. Naomi Marmon-Grummett. I'm really happy to welcome you here. I'm the founder and director of the Eden Center, and it's really exciting to be here for this conversation discussing whether intimacy after mikveh is a must. For those of you who don't know, the Eden Center works to improve the experience of mikveh and use it as a platform to empower Jewish women and couples around their physical, spiritual, intimate, and emotional health. The Eden Center runs community programs, we create resources, and we provide professional training around mikveh and well-being, from webinars like tonight, where we're really going to be discussing mikveh and intimacy as they overlap, to podcasts and printed resources. We have a breast self-awareness poster. We have Birkat Emunah resource to support women and couples going through infertility or loss. We actually have a lot of resources that you can certainly look up on our website. I'll give you the website in a minute. We run a unique mikveh attendant training course with an emphasis on sensitivity, and Chatan and Kala teacher trainings, which we invite you to take part in. Most of them are over Zoom, and we have our next cohort starting in February for the Kala teacher course. So if you're interested, I invite you to take a look at our website and explore all of these more deeply, www.theedencenter.com, EETHEEDENCENTER, for those of you who are from the British Isles or Australia. And I also want to give a shout out to the fact that we have many blogs, one of which Ayelet wrote and was kind of the spark for having the conversation tonight, and a podcast that also appears on our website, which Gabrielle is a host of, and she actually also spoke about this topic on the podcast, and I'll put those in the chat afterwards so you can look them up and hear directly what they had to say, but we're going to expand that conversation tonight. All of those offerings are what we do on a regular basis. And as always, my job is to remind you that our work is only made possible through the generosity of our donors. So please consider making a donation to the Eden Center so that we can continue running evenings such as this one at no cost on our website, theedencenter.com/donate. And we are really grateful to those who have already enabled this conversation. So tonight's conversation, as I said, we're going to be bringing a sociological, a halachic, hashkafic, and a sex therapy-based approach to the question of, is intimacy on mikveh night a must? And it's in keeping with Eden's approach of having a conversation around mikveh that's holistic and often brings up unspoken topics that we don't really discuss in other places. Tonight, we are going to be opening for questions at the end, but in order to allow everybody to feel comfortable, I asked that instead of asking them out loud or, and making people share their questions out loud, we're going to have Ilana Shefris on. Her page also comes up as the Eden Center, her participant label, name comes up that way. Ilana is studying psychology at Reifman University, and she's an intern at the Eden Center, and she's also the tech behind tonight's webinar. So thank you very much. And she's going to prioritize and pass on the questions to me, then we'll read them out loud. So Ilana, thank you for being on. And now I'm just going to put you in the background and spotlight the speakers. So our speakers tonight, and I'll disappear in a minute, in order of the way they're going to speak, I'm going to introduce you now, and then you'll just speak and, one after the other. So Ayelet Rees-Nadel is a social worker and a recent graduate of the Eden Center College Teachers course. She has the advantage of being the most newly married member of this panel, and she lives in Alon Shvut. She is going to share a personal sociological perspective about the topic at hand. Gabrielle Hodes is an experienced madrichat kalot and a mancha lechaye ishut, an intimacy and couples counselor, as well as a speech therapist. She has extensive training in halacha and zugiyut and has had the privilege to teach and work with many kalot and couples over the past 25 years. Abby Weiss is an MSW and an ASEC certified couples and sex therapist, and also does training for teachers, yoatzot, and therapists in the area of intimacy and sexuality. In addition, she's the founder of JewishIntimacy.com and produced a popular video series called Secrets, Judaism's Whole and Holy Approach to Intimacy. Through her courses, therapy, and speaking engagements, she has helped thousands of Jewish couples strengthen their marriages. So I would like to invite, and if it's okay, I'm going to invite Ayelet first to share her thoughts, and then Gabrielle, and then Abby. And thank you all for being with us tonight. Ayelet, please.
Thank you. So first of all, like Naomi said, I really just want to say thank you for having me here tonight. I feel like the reason this conversation came to my mind was definitely because of a lot of misconceptions that I heard and a lot of kind of underlying messages that I've been hearing, and be able to actually speak about them in a straightforward and open way is really like a beautiful zchut that we have. So really thank you. So first of all, I noticed that there was, I think many of us can notice that there's been a huge movement in the way that we educate chatanim and kalot around the wedding night. Definitely, maybe over the generations, we've had this shift towards teaching that there's no chiyuv to be having intercourse on the wedding wedding night. And in fact, we often hear instead that really it should be used, the wedding night should be used as an opportunity to connect, to learn this new physical space, especially for couples that were shomer negia, to learn to communicate with each other, to learn themselves, their boundaries, and to really just learn to trust themselves, of knowing when it's right for them to be having sex, to be having intercourse. And so there's really that big shift around the way that we educate around the wedding night. And I think that there is a kavana that some women have. There's a lot of kavanas that we can have when we go to the mikveh. One of those, I think, can be this kind of connection between the mikveh and the wedding night, which is like a beautiful idea that you come again from the status of being asur to mutar, reconnecting, maybe as if we're a young chatan and kala, and coming back together. And I felt like, from what I hear around me, there was kind of this disconnect between the messages that we were sharing about the wedding night and about mikveh night. It felt like maybe we were lacking that same communication around giving the space to the mikveh night also, to be a space to reconnect, to learn to go back into this physical space, to learn how to communicate in this new space, a space that we haven't had for however long. And for some couples, I think that shift can almost maybe feel almost as drastic as it might feel on that first night. That big shift of something that, like for couples keeping harchako, or maybe even doing more than we were when we were couples doing shomer negia. It's really a real distance that we feel. And then suddenly that night we're, again, maybe going from 0 to 100. And it feels like maybe that same language is missing, in that understanding that maybe we should be trusting couples to know themselves and to take their time and to use that night to connect in whatever way they feel, and to trust themselves to know when it's right for them to be having intercourse, and to not feel that there's pressure on that night. So I definitely feel like that's definitely a messaging that I think is important to be using nowadays. And I think that also another reason why I found that it felt a little bit off to me was that there's also this language that we use when we kind of connect automatically mikveh night with having intercourse. It felt to me almost not tsanua. And when I say not tsanua, I don't mean something that's secretive or inappropriate in the sense that having intercourse is inappropriate, but in the sense that we should actually be able to give the kavod and almost, recognize the kedusha that exists on that night, and be able to kind of respect the couple's space, I think when I hear, especially I think women speak about the mikveh night and the fear of what if people find out, or how much can I really share? And certainly I think there should be a sense of privacy around mikveh to a certain degree, but how much can we share when we need that help, or when we feel that it's actually right? So we feel like sometimes I think we hear that it feels almost inappropriate to be sharing with the people that we want to share with. I certainly, I'm not a parent, so I can't necessarily speak to how to educate our children, but I did hear from other people about this fear that if your children find out that night they are going to the mikveh, that it's almost as if your children know what you're saying to your children. This is what you're doing in your bedroom that night. And that felt to me, that feels, of course, if that's how you feel, that does feel inappropriate. And that feels like a shame that that's the way that we're speaking about it, that's the automatic connection, because I think we know that we're trusting couples to know when it's right for them. And at the same way that we're communicating that to ourselves, that you should trust yourselves, that doesn't have to be that night equals intercourse, then we shouldn't assume that that's what other people are assuming. We shouldn't have to be speaking around, kind of around the subject, and we should be able to speak about it openly, that it's really a night of connection, of coming together, and that we can therefore ask for help that we need from our friends, from our family, when we need help getting there, when we whatever it is, the support that we need around the mikveh night. We shouldn't have to feel like we're maybe sharing too much, because I think we shouldn't be sharing too much. We don't need to be sharing too much, because we're not. It's really just a night of coming together in the same way that our family and friends see us holding hands, and they don't necessarily assume that anything is that we're having intercourse that night, that we know that there's religious Jewish couples going through different stages in their marriage, and they're going through the different statuses of asur and mutar, and there doesn't have to be those connotations that anything has to be leading to intercourse on any specific night. So I think that in that way, that if we can shift that conversation, I think it's really important, because I think that if we don't have to be saying that there's any chiyuv on that night, then we should be able to change the conversation so that people can feel more comfortable in sharing, and also see the opportunities that night really gives to us, and to be able to also get the support that we need on that night.
Thank you, Ayelet, for sharing your thoughts. Really, really important points. And I think that for many couples, just reading the koteret, the headline of this webinar, is intimacy after mikveh a must, can create quite like a negative sort of visceral response for some people. For some people, just being told that they have to be sexually intimate at a certain time can be a very big turnoff. Okay, it can just shut down any desire that might have existed. It can sort of trigger the amygdala to go into sort of adrenaline mode, doing mode. And we know that usually when we want sexual intimacy goes together with oxytocin, with a state of being and not a state of doing. So if we're in a state of here's mikveh night and you have to do something, some people just that puts them into I have to perform, and now what, and it shuts them down. So I would definitely say that being told that you must do something with your body, like the same if someone said to you, you must eat, you must do something, it takes away a lot of the joy and the pleasure and the ability to listen to yourself and listen to what you actually want. Okay, and we want people to be connecting not only to what their own personal desire is, but also to what they want together as a couple. Then there are the other people who might really enjoy having a night that's sort of dedicated to being sexually intimate and moving from a time when they are now from asur to mutar, and having that rhythm within their marriage whereby this night is a night that they both look forward to, and they actually really look forward to the transition. Okay, they've had maybe 11 or 12 days where they haven't been together, maybe longer, and they're just waiting and counting down for that time, and having a night that's dedicated to this, and they're both fully aware of that, actually brings a lot of joy and a lot of sexual intimacy. So we'll be coming back to that, but I think the main thing that we want to tap into here is that we want couples to be being sexually intimate when there is cheshek and ratzon, when there is desire, and not because they are just having consent and not just agreeing. Okay, we all know that we can agree to have I don't know, a blood test, okay? We have to have it done for medical reasons, so we'll agree, but we don't want it, okay? And we want couples to be coming together because they want it and they desire it. So we want to try and think what's going to create more desire, and for some people, being told they have to do something is going to spiral down their desire and turn it up. For some people, it might turn it on. So let's have a look, and sort of what I'd like to do here is to understand where this idea comes from. Where does the idea come from in the Jewish literature about being sexually intimate on mikveh night? Is it a halachic obligation? Is it a myth? Is it a maybe hadracha tova? Is it guidance? Is it, and also how can it impact our desire? So I guess the first source I'd like to look at is something which references to what Ayelet was saying, which is a Gemara in Masechet Nida, which it talks about, it's got Tanya, Aya Rabbi Meir Omer, Mipnei Ma Amra Torah Nida Leshiva. Amra Torah Tehe Asura Shiva Yamim, Kedei Sheteh Chaviva Al Ba'ala, Kshat Knisata Lechupa. So there's an idea that when a couple, when a woman comes back from the mikveh and they've now been asurim, that we should have this feeling of that time when they came to the chuppah. Now, I like to sort of make a differentiation here. Traditionally, what Ayelet said is exactly the way people talk about it, that mikveh night is compared to your wedding night. I'd like to argue that it is not talking about wedding night, but it's actually talking about that moment at the bedeking, when the knisata lechuppah, that moment when they're about to go to the chuppah, when that electric atmosphere, when the husband and wife, or chatan and kala, see each other after having not seen each other for a week or for a few days, and they're just so longing with such high emotion, and they are longing to reconnect. Okay, and I think that maybe if we can reframe and think that that's maybe what the Gemara is saying, that maybe there's a natural feeling that a couple in a healthy marriage might be in a state that they want to be. Now, there are many people who are in a healthy marriage, it's important to say, who might not want to for various reasons, and we'll get to that as well. But there are many people who, after having had 11, 12 days or longer of not being together, that they really might want to just reconnect. And if we can identify it with that moment of the bedeking rather than thinking of the wedding night, which unfortunately for some people also, depending on who their Kala teachers were and whether they were trained by the Eden Center or not, might have actually some stressful memories about mikveh, about their wedding night, and it might not conjure up such fond, positive memories for them. So that's also another point to sort of put out here. So yeah, so I think that's important. So let's look at mikveh night rather than as a night that we have to be intimate, as a night that opens up a door. Okay, it opens up the door to the opportunity for a couple to reconnect, and it's an invitation from now going from asur to mutar rather than asur to chova. Okay, from forbidden to permission, to having permission to be together rather than being forbidden and having to do something. Okay, now, where did this idea come from? So we know that some of the Chachamim wrote that the mitzvah of Onah, okay, which is the mitzvah for a man to pleasure his wife, when she desires to be intimate with him, okay, there was an assumption maybe that there would be a natural desire after having gone to the mikveh, okay, and after not having been physically intimate, there was an assumption that maybe the woman would desire, and therefore he was obligated to fulfill that desire. Okay, I think it's also important to mention that generally when we talk about mitzvah onah today, we often talk about it more as an expression of maybe an extension of the mitzvah of ahavta l'reacha kamocha, and an expression of mutual sexual fulfillment rather than an obligation of the man, particularly to fulfill for the woman. So let's imagine that, again, we've now had any other thing in your life that you can think of when something might be asur. You've just eaten a basari meal, and I don't know about you guys, but when I finish my Shabbos lunch, I'll look at my watch to see when am I going to be chalavi and when can I have my tea. As someone who comes from England, we drink tea with milk. Now, any other time of the day, I don't necessarily do that. But when I've deliberately eaten meat in the middle of the day, I will look to know when I'm going to be chalavi. So you might imagine that a couple who have now had a tkufa where they have been asurim might be naturally looking towards when can they come together again. Okay, and that often happens when anything is forbidden. Someone who might be on a diet might be looking at what they can't have. Someone, I don't know, all of a sudden we're in the 9 days and we can have only chalavi. Everyone's thinking about when can they start having. That's just human nature to sort of look at what we can't have and want what we have. So maybe there was an understanding that, or an assumption that if a couples had not been together for a certain amount of time, there was going to be this natural desire. However, if the woman or the man are not interested in being sexually intimate on mikveh night, there is no obligation, okay? The Chachamim, they speak about a woman not being interested for various reasons because of omes nafshi, machala, all various different reasons. And there's a makor that talks about if the man is not nocher, he's not present during the omes hachayim, or it causes an omes nafshi, then he is also patur from his chova. So I think that we can see that there was an association between mitzvat onah and mikveh night. In the Gemara, it's more mentioned as a derech agav, okay, not necessarily as a halachic obligation, but in the later halachic literature, it was mentioned more as a chova, and it was definitely emphasized by the Mekubalim, okay? So the question that we may need to evaluate is it, again, is it a halachic obligation, or is it more like hadracha tova, guidance? This is a good idea to do this. A bit like when we look at, I don't know, the mitzvah of kibud avim. We do have a mitzvah of kibud avim, but it also goes with derech eretz. It goes with the teva of us to be able to be doing. There are certain mitzvot that we have that we would do anyway, even if they weren't a mitzvah. Okay, and when it comes to the mitzvah avonah, there's very specific measurements. Okay, there's a halachic. The halacha gives exact measures to the duty of the man. It says how frequent he has to be with his wife, depending on his occupation. And there's an understanding that one's omes has an impact on one's availability, both emotionally and physically, to be together as a couple. Okay, and based on that, there are different sort of frequencies that the mitzvah or the obligation falls on the man. But again, all of this is assuming that it's when both of them have desire and both of them want together. In addition to that, as an extension of that, in the Shulchan Aruch, it talks about not only about the frequency needs to be together, but when he's about to go on a trip or come back from a trip, or on mikveh night, then the mitzvah of onah comes up, okay? Again, assuming that those would be a time that a couple are about to say goodbye to each other, they're about to come together, they might want to be together. So what happens when, that isn't the case? So both the Noda B'Yehuda and the Chatam Sofer say that there is no obligation, and they see it as a sort of b'toch hagadel shel derech eretz, okay? So I think we can sort of sum up and see that there is a machloket. Some people look at it more as a obligation, and some people look at it, there are achronim that say that it's more guidance. But even for those who say that it is an obligation, there is a clear message amongst all of the poskim that if one of the partners are not interested in being sexually intimate on Leil Tefillah, on mikveh night, then there is no obligation for them to be together, okay? And I think that is so important to learn, okay? Because the must just creates a huge amount of pressure. And there might be many reasons why desire is absent on that night. It could be that just having the transitioning from asur to mutar creates a lot of challenges for certain couples. It could be that they're just not in such a good space in their marriage. It could be that there's stuff going on sexually, whether it be just stuff to do with differences between their levels of desire or certain sexual pain disorders. It could be that someone's just got flu or got a paper to deliver the next day, or an exam, or a wedding, or parent-teacher meeting, or you name it. Our lives are busy, okay? So it could be that there's just lots going on and that they were not able to create this beautiful space that we all you know, maybe imagined when we were having our color lessons of this beautiful mikveh night, idyllic evening where we are just spending time as a couple, and in reality that hasn't necessarily happened because other stuff is going on, and then we're not in the space where we feel like we're ready to be intimate, and having that sort of burden that that's something that we have to do isn't necessarily going to contribute to having a sort of mutual sexual fulfillment. I think I want to add into all the regular day-to-day things that can be happening, also things like mental health difficulties, postpartum depression, which will impact this type of thing, someone who's just had a miscarriage or lidah shkita, okay, or many other things that can happen both physically and mentally that are going to impact both the man and the woman's availability emotionally and physically to be in a space that they want to be sexually intimate in general and specifically on this night. And some people just find the transition hard, okay? And people need time to gently move over the transition. So the first thing I would suggest is that this is a topic that needs to be discussed, okay? That a husband and wife want to have this conversation. They don't want to have this conversation when the woman has come home from the mikveh. They want to be having this conversation well before that. They want to discuss what is mikveh night going to look like for them. And that can be, it could be a general conversation, but it also could be specific month by month, because it could be that this month, this particular mikveh night, we've got X, Y, and Z going on, but next mikveh night, we've cleared our calendar and we can spend the evening together. So it doesn't have to be black and white that we are always following this particular pattern, but we want to have that conversation. How are we going to build, how are we going to transition? So if it's going to be that we are going to come together on mikveh night, what are we going to do to enhance the evening and make it something that's special and positive for us? How are we going to create the desire? How are we going to create the ratzon and the cheshek as the week builds up, and especially as we're getting to the day of Tefillah? And on the other hand, if we're not going to be sexually intimate, and again, we could talk about, we could be sexually intimate, but we might not wanting to be having penetrative sex. So that's also, we can just discuss what is it that we're going to be looking at and what is it that we want to be doing that night. But let's have that conversation before, so that neither party become disappointed or expectations aren't met, which itself can then cause conflict and tension, and that's not going to be so helpful in terms of coming to be intimate in the days following, okay? The other, I think, important thing is if somebody thinks to themselves, well, maybe I won't go to the mikveh because we're not going to be sexually intimate tonight, so I shouldn't go. I think I would highly encourage someone who can go to go. Because just the fact that you can go, you can still give each other a hug, you can still hold hands, you can still touch, you can still be in a place where you're now permitted to touch and be together, even if you're not going to follow on with anything after that. And then that means that you can take things at your pace, how you want, and then slowly but surely build up to a place where you can both be sexually intimate and fulfill each other's needs and pleasure each other. I don't know time-wise if I can carry on in terms of talking about how to build desire, but maybe we'll let Abby take over, and then I'm happy to add practical tips and looking at different things about things that increase and decrease desire.
Okay, great. And I'll be happy for you to jump in at any point. I want to start my little section of this talk just really as with a disclaimer surrounding being in a healthy relationship and what that actually means and what it entails, particularly in regards to this conversation about intimacy, emotional intimacy and sexual intimacy. And so I really appreciate the point of view that Ayala brought forward, and Gabrielle, how you built on that, and this whole space that the Aiden Center has created for this discussion. And I want to put it out there that this discussion is taking place with the understanding that you are in a safe relationship, that you are physically safe, emotionally safe, and that you're able to check in on the reality of that. And to be able to listen to all of the pieces that are brought forward and recognize that I can have this discussion and it feels okay for me. So throughout our talk, I'm going to ask you to check in with yourself and how do these topics, how does this discussion affect you, and where am I at in this discussion? I particularly appreciated what Ayala brought up, was just really how significant it is for couples to be able to get the support. And I almost had to like check myself, like what is she referring to here? And just at the different stages of a couple's life, the different support that they might need. And whether it's a ride, whether it's, watching a kid, whether it's reorganizing this schedule so you can get to this mikveh because you like it better. I mean, there's so many pieces that go into a person getting to the mikveh, actually getting through the menstruation cycle, getting through the shiva nikiyim, and then actually getting to the mikveh, and to really be able to keep that in mind, to realize how much effort we women put in on a monthly basis to creating the potential for physical intimacy with our partners. And so I'm really asking everybody to recognize what effort you're putting in and what you're bringing forward. And so that entails you recognizing yourself. It also asks your partner to recognize you. It also begs of your partner to notice, how much effort is being put in here? What are the things that are needing to shift so that my partner, meaning, let's say, we're going to talk about heterosexual couples here, husband can relate to wife, right? And notice, wow, she has gone out of her way to make this happen. And so here, I want to talk a little bit about mutuality. There's a few things that I want to talk about. I want to talk about permission and consent, and I want to talk about the idea of mutuality. So hopefully we're going to have time for everything. And also, Gabrielle, for you to jump back in. So I think, first of all, there's this idea of permission, okay? This idea that what am I allowed to think and feel? I think even Ayala she kind of went out there when you wrote this article and when you put this out there to the public of what, are people even allowed to ask this question? Is this something that we're allowed to wonder about? And what are all the pieces that come with that? So I think, first of all, I welcome all of you to ask this question, to wonder out loud, okay? To wonder, what does it take for me to be physically available for my partner on mikveh night, okay? What does it take for me emotionally? What does it take for me physically? What is it like? What is it taking for me? And then, am I okay with that? And can I find myself in that space? So when I say find myself in that space, because we're talking right now about like creating desire. So not only does she have to get through the period, get through the shiva nikiyim, right? Her hormones are kind of getting back into whack, right? She has to get to the mikveh. She has to get home from the mikveh. Now she also has to find a space to have desire, right? And maybe even turn on her sexual self. So for some people that happens very naturally. And here, that's why I'm asking each of you to kind of check in with yourselves. What is my experience? Does that happen for me very naturally? Do I get sexually aroused by something that I see? Am I sexually aroused by something that I read? Do I want to be sexually aroused on the night of the mikveh? Maybe I just want to cuddle. Maybe I just want to feel his presence close to me. Maybe I'm not looking for actual sexual arousal. Again, every person with their own framework, okay? And then what I really want to encourage is what I try to explain to the clients that I'm working with, and that's kind of how I see a couple's sex life. Okay, so I see the sex life. I make like a big giant umbrella like this, and this is the sex life of the couple, right? And there's so many things that go on in here in this giant umbrella of a couple's sex life, and that includes flirting and joking and tickling and enjoyable touch and massage and oral sex, all the things that happen between couples, okay? And a part of that, their big giant sex life, is penetrative sex, okay? And that's intervaginal sex. And it's a part of what happens between a couple and their sex life. It's not the whole story. And I kind of want to bring that forward to the people listening and to all of us, is that, yes, this is an important part of a couple's sex life. It's not the only part. And when a couple is thinking about how do we want the night to look, how do we want it to go post mikveh, right? After we come home from the mikveh, what are all the possibilities that could exist for the couple? And so here is where I see space for the couple to begin to open up a dialogue, to begin to open up a discussion. And Gabrielle, I really appreciate what you were saying just about, can we have a discussion about this? You know, you're talking about, let's say during the Shiva Nikiyim, like, when can a couple have a discussion about this? And there's a lot of discussion surrounding, let's say, a couple who isn't yet married. Are you allowed to talk about X, Y, and Z that's supposed to happen after you get married? And there's, you know, a lot of discussion about it. I don't want to focus on it right now, but what I want to bring forward here is the value of the couple, the husband and the wife, being able to open up a discussion surrounding their physical intimacy, okay, using language, using their own experiences, talking about their desires. That means you have to know what you want first, right? Perhaps making space for fantasies, making space for creative role play. When I used to be a college teacher in America, something that I really encourage the young couples to do is like to go to Barnes and Noble. I don't know if anyone, Barnes and Noble is a big giant bookstore in America. Okay, you go to the Barnes and Noble in the next town, okay, in the next city. So there's these big giant bookstores in every city. You don't want to run into everyone from your community, but go to the sexuality section and like flip through a few books, get some ideas, open up a discussion for what is pleasurable to me. Now, for some couples, the whole topic of like what is pleasurable to me could be a stressful topic. Okay, so that is knowing in advance, is this a stressful topic? Okay, is this something that we don't want to go to? Is it better for us to not discuss this, but to kind of build up in a way, like, meaning, let's say post mikveh, we snuggle, we hold hands. The next night we put our arms around each other. The third night, perhaps we, you know, are not wearing our tops. There are ways to slowly unfold in terms of, you know, getting to be more physical. It doesn't have, like, every couple is going to have their own language. And I really encourage couples to take time to know what their language is. I think that there are so many times that we kind of go with what are the assumptions here? What is expected of us? You know, what does the other expect of us? What do we expect of ourselves? And I think that's a place where a lot of couples get hurt, because there's this allowing the experience be about the other and not about themselves. And so I'm not implying not to be a giving lover. That's not what I'm implying right now. What I'm implying right now is for each person to have a sense of themselves. And so in order to do that, I just wanted to take a minute. I want to take a minute, and I encourage everyone to do this. You could pause the video or you could do it on your own, is to really just do a breathing exercise. Okay. And I encourage this because as everybody said earlier tonight, our lives today are fast paced. In a day, there could be 20 things going on. And one of those things are going to the mikveh. And next scene, you're at the mikveh and you're supposed to be enjoying it, right? But then your husband's texting you that the dinner just got burned and your kid is calling you that, and like, who knows, right? And it's like, how do we take a minute to ourselves? How do we focus on what's going on for us? And so I do that by, you know, encouraging clients, encouraging individuals to kind of sit, allow both feet to be firmly on the ground, notice what it's like to be grounded, to be held in the chair, close your eyes, kind of go inward for a few moments, breathe in through your nose and out through your mouth. And as you're breathing in this way, I notice if there's a heaving going on in the chest. And I really want to be able to focus the breath into the core of the body, the center. And some people don't even know what that means, but we want the sensation of being able to move oxygen around the body. Just as a side note, and please continue breathing in this way and noticing oxygen moving from your chest down to your abdominal area. is that if you take both fingers and you put your middle fingers and you place them below your belly button and you actually allow your lower abdomen to expand and contract into your hands. First of all, it might be an unfamiliar sensation, right? Because that's not something that we do. We're like, everyone's kind of like always holding it in, right? And here I'm kind of like, let it hang out a little bit and notice what it's like to have oxygen moving down to the core center of the body. Now, this alone might be causing sensations of arousal. Why? Because just having oxygen moving to the pelvic region of the body is going to allow for increased blood flow to that area. And so giving your body the opportunity to regulate itself, to notice itself, to kind of check in with itself. And similarly, as you're continuing to breathe in that way, what it really means to access all areas of your body with the oxygen and not keep the oxygen up here. Sorry, you can't really see me. We don't want to keep the oxygen up here. We want to be moving the oxygen down. So just take a few more breaths in that way. I'm gonna wind down this part. I just wanted to bring up two things. Gabrielle, you didn't end up saying that piece about Rav Kimche, but I really loved it. In our preparing for this evening, we brought forward an idea that you should. Rav Kimche said that you should have penetrative sex. The mitzvah of bia should happen only on the fourth night. And what I loved about it is it really took into account what potentially needs to happen between a couple in order to lead up to the act. And that could, like, almost like I thought of it in my brain as like stages. And those stages seemed really safe, really healthy, really encouraging communication between partners. I thought that was also an opportunity for couples to develop language. And some couples will say, well, we tried to talk about it, we couldn't really find the words. So I would encourage you, in the dark with your heads on the pillow, perhaps holding hands, talk about it a little bit, talk about what feels good, what doesn't feel good, what's less enjoyable, what is your favorite part, what is a possible fantasy. And I very much believe that when a young couple is developing their sex life, so they want to try this, they want to try that, there's a lot of creativity involved. At a certain point, right, let's say 5 years in, 10 years in, 15 years in, it is possible for couples to have we call it a sexual script, and it kind of just goes, not so much thought goes into it. And so I would encourage for a more mature couple, an older couple, 15 years, 20 years in, to be able to think outside of what we usually do, to perhaps introduce what we call on the Haftam website that I love, Avizare Oneg. Perhaps be open to exploring a different part of the body that, let's say, in the first 15 years was considered off limits. And what would we need in order to explore that in a way that felt safe and good? I think it's important to recognize that at different ages and stages, right, there are so many factors that could kill desire in a relationship, right? Like, something that I hear consistently in my office is like, and things are going okay, and then, the kid, meaning, let's say they have a bunch of kids, right? So the kid who's causing the most issues that month, does the thing that they're always doing that causes the issue, right? And this, you can everybody plug in their own piece here of what they're dealing with, right? And so all of a sudden, I'm not thinking about sex, I'm thinking about this kid who's about to get kicked out of school. No, right? And then I'm thinking about let's say a younger couple that I'm working with, that the mother-in-law who always does X, right? And that hurts the daughter-in-law's feelings. And then she gets a phone call the day of the mikveh and the mother-in-law says, da, da, da. and recognizing our triggers and recognizing how that takes us out of a place of desire. So here again, I'm going to take you right back to, and I'm going to end with this, of being able to check in with yourself. Okay, what are the things that are not allowing you to be emotionally and physically present in this relationship? And what are the things that happened that day? What are the things that happened that week? Are there any ways that I can maneuver around these things? And how can I process it with my partner so that we can get to a place of more emotional intimacy? I feel like that was a lot of information.
That was
Please
great.
feel free. Please feel free to be in touch with questions.
I'm going to take a minute to recap, and then I'll ask you guys some of the questions. What I heard being said was, first, I'm going to, in one sentence, Ayala suggesting that we look at mikveh night as a night to reconnect without feeling the pressure of necessarily having to have intimacy, that is sexual penetrative intimacy. And once we disconnect sex from mikveh night as a must, then we're able to connect in other ways, and perhaps also be able to ask for help that we need, or be able to talk about it in a different way, because it doesn't automatically mean sexuality, but it's a night that's part of our cycle. And then I heard Gabrielle saying that the bottom line is that according to many opinions, you don't have to have sex. And even to opinions that say that it's preferable, there are lots of reasons why, and both partners have to be on the same page and not have omas nafshi, which is mental stress, or other things that are interfering. And if we look at it that way, then perhaps we'll be able to increase desire and be able to talk in different ways, and that we should both be on the same page using communication to make sure that it's good for both of us for whatever we're choosing to do. And Abby really stressed that the idea of checking in with yourself and regulating yourself and your body in order to bring yourself in a different way, and being able to build up in whatever way is good for you as a couple. And I want to suggest in that thinking that for many people, and certainly the way that we talk about it at Eden, is using the mikveh itself as a place where women can check in with themselves. And when you're doing your preparations, part of checking yourself over is also connecting emotionally to who you are and what you are and where you're holding. So even that you can bring yourself in a different way with a different conversation, in a way that will be supportive and also hopefully connect to your sense of desire. And the partner at home can also be doing that. And I think it's really important to combine all of those things. So there were two questions that came from the audience, which I want to put to you. The first was, even though we could talk about it, sorry, let me just read what was written. And even though we now know that it's okay to delay intimacy, there could be times where one partner feels more strongly than the other about whether or not they want sex on that night. How do we have this conversation without making it feel like a rejection to the partner who does want to be intimate in physically penetrative sex? Because even though we can know, I'm like further interpreting, even though we can know up here that it's fine, it still can feel here like a rejection.
So I think I'll let Abby answer that, but I would want to just widen that question and just say that that is really reflective of a typical issue or challenge that most couples experience, which is parim b'tshukah, differences in levels of desire. So most couples, either throughout their marriage or at certain times in their marriage, are going to experience differences in their level of desire, where one wants to be together more frequently than the other, or one wants to explore different creative positions or different creative things, and the other one might feel less comfortable and prefers to do, go through the same, as you said, this tasrit, the same script, And that is something that doesn't only occur on mikveh night. It might be heightened on mikveh night, but it's something that couples deal with throughout marriage. I think that's really just important to put that there. And Abby.
No, I'm going to just piggyback off of what you said, Gabrielle. It's interesting. It was in my notes to mention that how can an individual express where they're at surrounding desire without it being insulting to their partner? And I think it's exactly that. First of all, it's important for. There's so many things that happen in between couples. There's so many subconscious messages that are being passed back and forth, right? Of reject, like Naomi went right to rejection, right? And is it really rejection, or is it her being able to say, this is where I'm at right now, and him being able to respect that and not make that about him and how desirable he is. Now, I definitely would say that if this is a situation that's being repeated consistently and there is never a time that the couple is able to have meaningful sexual relations, then there is an issue. But if what's going on is that one person is trying to bring forward their true experience of themselves, then I think it's really hard. But that's exactly what a process of differentiation looks like. And differentiation is like a really healthy thing that needs to happen within couples, but it's really, really hard because it's being able to see the other person and hear the other person and not make it about you. And it's like a very fine dance. It's much more complex though. It's a very fine dance. And I think that an individual who is aware of, let's say, his or her boundaries, because I have couples, who have expressed that he's not ready for penetrative sex on mikveh night, right? And being able to hear the other and understand the other and not make it about you and your own self it's a really hard thing, but it's something really worth working on, really.
So I think, again, Abby, when a couple are able to do that, then it gives both of them the ability to explore what they really want. And if you're
100%.
in a place where you feel like you have to do something because that's what the other person wants,
100%.
then you're never really discovering what you want. Okay. I think that maybe also what we could add here is it's a game, and there might be times when you don't have spontaneous desire, but you know that the other one wants to be together with you. And then I think it's the question about, if you know that is it just you're not in the mood because you're tired, or you're not in the mood for whatever reasons, X, Y, or Z, but you know that generally when you are sexually intimate, you have fun and you have a good time and you connect. And then do you in that moment in time want to push yourself out of that, inertia or that feeling of no spontaneous desire to get yourself to a place where you can maybe create the desire? And the example I like to bring is one that Emily Nagoski brings, where she talks about, she's written a great book called Come As You Are, and on one of her, I think it was her podcast or her TED Talk, she talks about an analogy of a woman being invited to her best friend's birthday party, let's say on Thursday. And Thursday comes around, and she was super excited on Sunday when she thought about the birthday party. But Thursday came around, she'd had a long day at work, she had a headache, and she was tired. She just wanted to get home and go into her pajamas. And but she'd committed to go into this party. And so she was going to go because it's her best friend and she's not going to miss it. So she took a shower and she felt a bit better, put some makeup on, perfume, got herself dressed up. Still not really wanting to go, but she's getting more in the mood, gets in the car, and she sort of pulls herself there, drags herself there. But once she gets there, her friends are all there. Her friends whose birthday it is super happy that she's there. There's great food, great music, great conversations, and she ends up having a wonderful time. And so she says sometimes in a long-term relationship where we're not always going to be on the same page, one of us has to just put ourselves in the bed. So I think that it's a delicate dance, because we only want to do it as long as when we do get there, we first of all have permission to change our mind if we want to, and say, I was really trying and I really wanted to, but I can just see this isn't going where, this isn't good for me, this isn't good for us. But sometimes we do want to go out of our comfort zone to be able to please our spouse. But we can only do that if it's going to be good for us when we're there. Okay, and if it isn't, then what happens is we end up creating sort of, instead of an upward spiral that creates more desire because we just had a good experience, and we'll remember that next time that we haven't got the energy, and we'll think, but it was so good the other day, so I'm going to put myself together and put myself in the mood. If it doesn't end up being good for any reason, then that's going to create a downward spiral of desire and make us really not want to be together the next time.
So you just brought to the table the second question. I said there were two questions, and one was, can you give some practical tips for how to create desire? I think you sort of partly answered that, of like showing up and you putting yourself in that place of, you know, okay, I'm going to get into this, or I'm like, even sometimes scheduled desire, scheduled meetings and sexual encounters can help you to be in that space. But do you guys have any other tips that you could, practical things that you could suggest?
I could just jump in. I guess we could all just jump in, but I do feel like there is a lot to be said for scheduling, scheduling surrounding the day of the mikveh, but also the week. Like, what is the week going to look like? Are there things that you could push off? Let's say the partner, like it's known that, you know, the partner has mornings off. Could you make a morning available that week? I very much encourage couples to just literally take out your yoman and see where time overlaps. But I think even more important right now is just take out your yoman with yourself. I encourage people to like read perhaps erotica, if that speaks to. I think people have to have a sense of like, what is arousing to me. Perhaps, you know, having sexual texting with their partner is something that creates desire, something that creates excitement. I really think that like it's worth taking time to think about what is arousing to me. And we're talking about desire, so there has to also be that piece of desire for the other person, right? There's the sexual arousal for oneself that could happen, not necessarily surrounding, you know, their partner. But then I think what we're talking about more is, how do I then connect this to relationship with my partner? And so perhaps doing any of those things together. But yeah, everybody else could jump in.
I think also, oh, sorry, Gabrielle, do you want to go?
No, go for it. Go for it.
I just also was thinking about when I was speaking about the beginning about harchakot and the time when we're keeping our chakot, and I think that can be maybe also like a bit of a confusing space. Like, what are we allowed to be bringing up and speaking about at the time? How much can you open it up when you don't have that form of communication? And so I think like learning what the spaces that we have to be able to kind of start that dialogue, the flirting that you feel comfortable with during that time, so that you can feel like you're not totally disconnected, and then all of a sudden you're back together again. There's something about keeping up that connection throughout the time of being in nida.
Agree. And again, I think it follows on from what Abby's saying, but for some people it's about making sure that they've got the time, that they've created the space. For some of them, maybe it's about buying a book together. You spoke about going to Barnes and Nobles, but maybe buying a book and having a book that you can be learning through together that comes up with some different ideas. And some couples who have a hard time opening up the conversation and talking about it, if they learn from read a book together, then just by reading the book, or even just reading an article together, then they can, it's a springboard. It's not one of them suggesting it. Oh, what do you think about that? Does that speak to you? Or nowadays there are so many, in Israel at least, I don't know what it's like in the States or anywhere else out of Israel, but there are lots of different card games made by couples therapists, different card games and board games that help, and dice and different things that create opportunities to play games and bring up different ideas of what we would be liking to, you know, experience together. Abby also mentioned the site, the Ahavtem, which have got wonderful articles and wonderful ideas and wonderful resources. So I think that those are all places I would send people to who are looking for ways to increase.
I'm going to bring my card game. I'm going to bring my card game also, because Odea Bin Lewin made this great card game called Connections. there's a bunch of resources. Thank you, Gabrielle, for bringing that forward.
So I think that's another idea. And I think just being in a place again where we've got permission, and we can, for some people, what's going to create the desire is going for a long walk by themselves and clearing their head. And for someone else, it's going to be taking a long shower or a bath and just unwinding from the day. It's about what can we do to put ourselves in a state of being rather than doing, and maybe us realizing that we do need something from our partner, and then do we feel comfortable asking for that, and does our partner feel able to give it? We have to always remember, in marriage we might have a need and we might have a request, and doesn't mean that the partner is going to be able to give us what we're looking for. So it could be that we need our partner to start up with us and to flirt with us, or to tell them what they want, because that's what we need, and they don't feel comfortable doing that. So we can't demand it, and then we have to sort of come back to the drawing board and say, okay, so that's not working. Let's think how we can do this in a different way.
Mamash, great points. And I almost feel like it's great to say that as much as we're talking about giving permission to not have sexually penetrative intimacy on mikveh night, I certainly think that one of the things that halacha desires is for us to feel intimate and feel connected on mikveh night, and create a structure within which we are able to focus on the connection between the couple, which is different in some way and has sexual overtones and sexual closeness, and builds toward that as a result of the whole structure of Taharat HaMishpacha. And hopefully mikveh night can bring us closer to actually wanting to be together on many different levels. And that's what we're aiming toward, and why we're even having this conversation, so that it can be good for us as a couple whenever it is that we decide we want to come together. And I think using all of these tips and all of these methods together will help to bring us there. Before I just want to say,
I also wanted to add one little point that I didn't mention, which I think is that one of the things that I didn't bring into the halachic discussion was the whole idea of the connection between mikveh night and also coinciding with the mitzvah of paru or ravu. And I think that, again, one of the coolest things, and someone correct me if I'm wrong, but I think the fact that halachic literature, which is from so many hundreds of years ago, already recognizing the woman's need, that the man had to be there for when the woman desired, whereas in contemporary literature, Abby, am I correct in saying that recognizing women's desire is really something that's only been seen in the last 100 years, or even less than that, much less than that. And we already were there in the Gemara talking about a man, the man needing to fulfill her needs. Like, who spoke about her needs? Like, that's incredible that was spoken about. And I think that the other thing to note is that because today so many people do use different types of hormonal birth control, we have lost the natural rhythm. But let's remember that when women were more connected to their bodies and less influenced by, modern living, and they were more connected to the moon, and more connected to themselves, the natural cycle of a woman is that around the time that they go to the mikveh is the time around the window of fertility, when their estrogen, depending on whether you're British or not, is at its peak. And often women find that when their estrogen is its highest, they have the strongest libido. So I don't think it was only about the fact that they were looking at women and the mikveh night being a night that the woman desired because they haven't been together for a certain tkufa, but it was also because that's when her natural desire was at its peak. And I think that's another really important thing to mention. And especially women who maybe are feeling lower desire, if you are using any type of hormonal birth control, it's really important to know that it could be that the hormonal birth control could be impacting your desire. So that's just another important point to put in there.
100%.
so important. Did you want to add something, Abby?
No, I'm just, yes, I'm seconding everything that Gabrielle just said.
Great. Ayala, did you want to add any point at the, to wrap up? No. So I'm just going to share on the chat a few resources, Gabrielle's podcast link and Ayala's blog link that I definitely encourage everybody to look at. And I thought this was a wonderfully informative evening where we brought up a topic and you really came to it from lots of different perspectives and shared those perspectives so well to give us a conglomerate of different thoughts and how to, move forward in these topics. I really want to thank you for widening our knowledge. And I definitely say, if you enjoyed tonight's program, I want to encourage everybody to not only read and listen to Ayelet's blog and Gabrielle's, but to join other upcoming events. On February 12th, we're going to have a event in Efrat discussing BRCA and breast cancer. That is going to be L'Refuat Noah Bat Tova Nova Charetz and Dvora Bat Nissa Etzel, who is Debbie Abelo, and they'll both be there that evening. We have a continuing Kala teachers education event also on February 12th about when to refer to a sex therapist. So if you're a Kala teacher, make use of that. On February 14th, in Ramat Beit Shemesh, Gabrielle will be part of a group who are talking about perimenopause and approaching. It will be Gabrielle, Yoetz at Halacha, Ruthie Finn, and Shoshana Olshan, who are talking about those topics, and that will be on the website very soon also. And look at the website for many more things that are coming on. Stay connected to the Eden Center, like us on Facebook or Instagram. Donate, as I said before, add your voice to the conversation by writing a blog like Ayelet did. You can volunteer your time. And thank you all for being with us tonight. I know that the panelists are open if there are any other questions that you can write to them afterward. Thank you for being here. And thank you all for participating.
Bye.
Take care.
Bye.
Thank you.